ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the March 4th, 2014 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It is my privilege to call this meeting to order. There are copies of our agenda on either side of the room. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to pick up a copy and follow along with our proceedings tonight. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both with respect to items that are on our agenda tonight, as well as a segment under item 4, which is reserved for public comment, and specifically comments of a general nature with respect to items that are not appearing on our agenda tonight. It is our custom to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, so we would please invite everyone at this moment to rise and join us in reciting the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah, I have to give a shout out to the two youngsters in the back that did an outstanding job with the allegiance. Thank you. I hear you all the way up here. Well done. With that, I'd like to ask our village clerk to please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Olson?
Here.
Commissioner Rankin?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Here.
Commissioner Durkin?
Here.
Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 3 on our agenda, which pertains to minutes of prior council meetings. We have a couple of sets of minutes on our agenda tonight for review and approval. We have our executive session minutes for approval only from February 4th, 2014, as well as the minutes of our regular council meeting that was held on February 18th, 2014. Are there any questions, comments, changes, or corrections to either set of minutes from any members of the council? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Those minutes are all adopted. Thank you. And that brings us to item 4, which, as mentioned earlier, is reserved for public comments of a general nature. If anyone here in attendance tonight has any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to items not appearing on our agenda, later on, we would invite you to please come down. The protocol is to give us your name and your address, and we would welcome hearing from you. Please. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm not sure if my little item is on the agenda. It says you have stormwater utility grant program on,
Yes.
and I just had a kind of a general comment about the controversy over the church, charging the churches.
We'll categorize that one as a general comment, so please go ahead.
Okay.
And we could just have your name and address.
Carol Richard, and I live at 206 55th Place.
Thank you. Welcome.
Okay, and I'm a retired science teacher and water educator and lifetime churchgoer. And I just want to say that this whole controversy of the churches being charged for stormwater maintenance, stormwater collection and so forth, based on the amount of impervious land they have, it just says to me, it's education waiting to happen. And I wish that however the churches resolve it, they would meet and meet with their own congregation and decide what they want to do about it, but see the big picture and not just that they're being charged for something they shouldn't be charged. And figure out how they're going to use this as an educational tool, because water is one of the things we have stewardship over. And that's what we learn through Scripture and in, I think, every religion. So, I just would love to see the churches start educating people on the controversies, the issues of water today, because many people say this is going to be what our next war is over. Water is extremely important. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for being here tonight. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Just a couple general comments.
Sure. May I ask you for your name and
Ben
address?
Coyle, 5400 Walnut Place, Unit 211.
Thank you.
I usually park at Belmont Station and take the train into the city, and lately, and I pay daily if I don't take the Pace bus. The last couple of times I've parked there, I've gone down there and parked, there haven't been any spaces at all for the daily parking. I don't know if anybody's brought that up to the board or not, but certainly it's an issue for me, and I don't know if the board has discussed adding any more paid parking down at Belmont Station, but it's pretty packed pretty much every day. And then the other comment kind of relates. I had read an article on Patch.com about a apartment building being built downtown or something along those lines. I just had a question about 922 Warren. Is that half of the building ever going to get built, or is there sort of a time restriction on that? Because it's been a couple of years now, and it's kind of an eyesore in my opinion. So.
Two things. First of all, thank you. Three things. First of all, thank you for being here tonight and sharing your comments.
You're
Second, with respect to parking at the Belmont train station commuter lot, we'll assess what other questions and inquiries we had. I know periodically we'll revisit with Metra the parking situation at the Metra stops, and we're fortunate to have 3 of them in Downers Grove. And if the parking situation is becoming one where there needs to be some additional reconfiguration or whatnot, then it's certainly something that we can discuss with them. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Third, with respect to the 922 Warren, that I think pretty clearly was a victim of the Great Recession, and maybe Mr. Fieldman can add some information about its current status. I know it's changed hands a couple of times, at least a couple of times, since the original project started. Maybe you can provide us with what the status is.
Obviously, construction started and then it ceased. There are deadlines that have to be adhered to. They did miss those deadlines due to the recession. We've worked with the owner to get going again, and we're working with them right now to reinstate their building permits, pull new building permits, and we expect them to pursue construction this construction season.
That would be terrific. Look forward to that. I know we've been working with other owners who held that property to try to get to the same place, and just hasn't happened yet. But obviously, we'd like to see that completed as much as anyone else.
Just one recommendation. I know sometime back, I think the village had leased a portion of that parking lot on Chase Avenue for extra parking when they were resurfacing the main parking lot at Belmont Station. I don't know if you reassess it, that may be an option as far as maybe leasing part of that lot from that business.
Again, appreciate the suggestion. Certainly something we can look into as part of our periodic review of parking in various places throughout the village.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here tonight. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, staff. Tom LeCren, 545 Chicago Avenue. I'd like to make a suggestion as to how we handle comments or commentary on items that are on the first reading. For the consent agenda and active agenda, asking for public comment first, followed by council members, is fine because those areas have been vetted numerous times. Most people have had a good chance to comment. With respect to first reading items, I'd like to suggest that we follow the procedure that we use for public hearings, in that once the item is described, the mayor then asks for the council to comment, then public comment, then back to the council. I think that would create a greater dialogue between the public and the council. We get to respond then to council comments, which we can't do today unless we do it offline. That's just a suggestion. Could be tried a few times to see how it works or whatever. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the comment. We've, over the years, tried various different sequences of questions and comments and have changed it back, and then changed it again. I think the workshop or the first reading portion of our agenda is supposed to be, or at least historically has been, more of a informal discussion. So I think perhaps I can address your concern, Mr. LeCren, by, regardless of who goes first, just making sure that there's plenty of opportunities for anyone and everyone to speak on the issue after the presentation has been made. I think traditionally we don't discourage anybody from asking follow-up questions whenever they have them, but you're right, sometimes a prompt is helpful so that folks know when it is appropriate to speak, although generally the first reading / workshop is supposed to be to have a conversation about the topic without the necessary formality of who goes first and whatnot. But fair point, and we'll give it a try. Lord, goodness knows we've tried various things over the last 10 years. Thank you. Any other questions or comments of a general nature, whether you want to go first or last, or even in the middle? Very good. Thank you for the comments from everyone tonight. We'll move on to item 5 on our agenda, which is reserved for council member reports, report outs from council members regarding various activities and goings on in the community. I'll start with Commissioner Olson tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. Wanted to report out on a county board meeting I attended last Tuesday. I attended the committee meeting, finance committee meeting, where the topic of the DuPage Visitors Bureau was discussed. I'm not sure how familiar folks are with DuPage Visitors Bureau, but this is a certified Visitors Bureau by the state. They receive state grant money to fund their operations, and this is the certified bureau from all of DuPage County. There are at least three, many others, but three major communities that are not community members of the DuPage Visitors Bureau: Downers Grove, Lisle, and Naperville. And these communities have the second, third, and fourth most hotel rooms of any community, of the communities in DuPage County. The funding for the DuPage Visitors Bureau is based upon the number of hotel rooms, number of hotel stays, population of the county, and a small portion on restaurant and food and beverage tax receipts. There's a concern that I raised at the county board, the finance committee meeting, about, since Downers Grove is not a member, the DuPage Visitors Bureau has decided to undertake a model where they charge the hotels in the non-member communities to try to recoup the cost recoup the revenues for the Visitors Bureau that they would have had if those communities were members. And so this new funding model has resulted in a almost 5-fold increase in dues for the hotels in the non-member communities like Downers Grove. And I think this is the two major hotels, the DoubleTree and the Marriott Suites, have decided not to be members this year. I think this is a concern for Downers Grove, and I went to the county board and raised it. There was discussion at the county board, spirited discussion, I would say. There were 2 items that were in front of the county board, one of which was the letter authorizing, saying that this is a certified Visitors Bureau. That was passed with some dissenting votes. There was another item providing additional funding from the county to their Visitors Bureau that was tabled pending discussion per the suggestion of Chairwoman Tonya Corey, who is the chairman of the Economic Development Committee at the county board. So I think this is an issue that we in Downers Grove should be following and should be mindful of. The DuPage Visitors Bureau is a group that is supposed to represent all of DuPage County, but I believe has not been fully representing Downers Grove, Lisle, and Naperville, especially our hotels, and I think it's quite unfair so that they would be attempting to effectively penalize our hotels in Downers Grove based on decisions that are made by a governmental body like ourselves. So I just wanted to raise the issue for members of the council. There was a discussion of this in the DuPage Mayors and Managers County Summary last week about what was said, what I said, what other county board members said. And I just think it's worth keeping in mind as the county board continues to discuss this, and I think it's just worth us keeping an eye on it and advocating for the hotels in our community who are, I think, unfairly being treated unfairly in this new system.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate you sharing that. There is a long history that is associated with the Visitors Bureau of DuPage County. I won't try to summarize our history with that organization here tonight. Needless to say, I know that if Mr. Castle were here tonight from our Economic Development Corporation, he would probably provide some additional history and background, because the EDC does advocate on behalf of hotels who are members of the EDC, as well as the Chamber that also has interactions with the Visitors Bureau. So I know, and Commissioner Durkin, as another council liaison to the EDC, wants to chime in, please do. But this is an issue that I know is front and center, comes up from time to time. with respect to the EDC because of the hotel's participation in that organization, and they look to our Economic Development Corporation as an advocate for them. Obviously, we're members of that organization, and so through that organization, it's a lot of organizations, we are both cognizant of it and advocate on behalf of our hotels. And without getting into details because time doesn't permit here, steps have been taken over the years to try to address that situation in ways that are most advantageous to our community. It continues to be a question as to what is the best approach for dealing with that situation, and can we be more successful through our own Visitors Bureau as part of our EDC than through the county organization? And that's just one of the questions that I know that they have been dealing with. I don't know if Commissioner Durkin wants to add anything.
Well, I would just note further that I agree. I think the funding model, what our Economic Development Corporation and Visitors Bureau is doing in Downers Grove is very good and good work, and I have a lot of respect for what they are doing. I think it's a fundamental fairness concern when the money that the DuPage Visitors Bureau is getting is predicated upon the hotel stays and the population of these non-member communities, and yet they are not allowing these hotels to take full advantage of that. So I think I have a lot of concerns with it. I'm pleased that there were a number of members of the county board who had concerns with it. I think most vocal was Jim Healy of Naperville. So I hope that there are some steps taken in the right direction.
I do too. I think you are right to be concerned. I think there have been various shades of concern for the last 12 years by my reckoning. And I know that there are a number of different organizations at both the municipal and the county level, as well as other organizations, quasi-governmental organizations that are aware of it. But thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to remind folks that early voting is going on. It started Monday, runs through March the 15th, and you can vote right here at our own Village Hall from 8:30 to 7:30 p.m. I'm sorry, 8:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. Monday to Friday, and on Saturday from 9 to 3 o'clock. Please go out and vote. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Rankin?
I attended a presentation by the League of Women Voters a couple weeks back, and it was about stormwater. And there was a really interesting presentation by a gentleman from CMAP talking about the value of stormwater utilities for local government in the Chicago region. It was very interesting. We also had our own Karen Dalton-Lang there presenting, and she did a wonderful job. But the one thing I wanted to share was Scarce was there. They did a presentation, and they had a useful resource about places to recycle all sorts of items that you can't throw out in the garbage. And you could find that information on their website, which is www.scarceecoed.org. So stuff like household items, batteries, CFL bulbs, medication, which we're doing now. But it's very interesting, so just wanted to share that.
Thank you for doing so. Appreciate it. Commissioner Barnett?
I have no report, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Durkin?
Thanks, Bob. I have no report. Thought I was the only guy that was going through my calendar.
It's not an obligation.
Sometimes it feels like one, but you're the only guy with have to say.
Commissioner Newstead?
This month of March is all about severe weather preparedness, and March 2nd through 8th is National Severe Weather Preparedness Week. There's a lot of information right on our website. Pardon my voice tonight, by the way, a little scratchy. Downers.us, we have a lot of information about getting prepared for severe weather. Talks about our siren protocol and other things that families and residents can do to be ready in case of severe weather happening in our community. So check that out. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Just to make you feel better, I'm going to save my report for the mayor's report later on. Thank you. That brings us to item 6 on our agenda tonight, which is reserved for public hearings. We have no public hearings tonight, so we'll move right on to item 7, which is our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second. Are there any questions or comments by members of the audience? Any questions or comments by members of the village council? Are you sure there's no questions from the audience? Have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Consent agenda passes unanimously. This brings us to item 8, which is our active agenda, and we have 4 items on our active agenda tonight. First, do I have a motion with respect to item 8A? Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance amending Chapter 14 of the Downers Grove Municipal Code to establish reverse commuter parking and amend parking lot provisions?
So moved.
Second. Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Questions or comments from members of the council? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Ayes have it. Matter passes unanimously. It brings us item 8B as in boy. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance authorizing a special use for 2535 Ogden Avenue to permit construction of a restaurant with a drive-through?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Any questions or comments from members of the village council? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, that matter also passed unanimously. Congratulations, good luck with the construction. That brings us to item 8C as in Charlie. Do I have a motion to implement a stormwater utility grant program as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Questions or comments from members of the village council? Commissioner Barnett?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to keep my comments brief, except to suggest to my colleagues that we review the minutes from the last time we talked about this. I'm going to vote for this because as I mentioned before, I would, because I'm looking for any opportunity to help out the church community. I don't like the way it's structured. I don't like the use being what seems to be driving the eligibility that I have a problem with. And I don't, obviously I have my thoughts on churches being involved at all are pretty well known, but the use is a real problem for me, and I think it's really wrong the way we're doing it. I will vote for it because I want to try and help these folks out, but I still would encourage everybody to think that through and extend that concept of legislating, if you will, based on use to other places where it might apply. It just doesn't sit well with me, so.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Couldn't tell if that was your hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just checking.
No.
To make sure. I agree with a lot of what Commissioner Barnett said. I also am troubled by the fact that this seems to focus on the use of the parcel and not the parcel itself. And yet, I also will vote in favor of, because I do think that we should, and have been talking about for some time, doing something that would allow an opportunity for tax-exempt organizations. This one is focused mostly on faith-based tax-exempt organizations to take advantage of a program where they could engage in a cost share and at the same time, hopefully, both minimize the impact of the stormwater utility upon them, but also advance the goals of the stormwater program, which is to, of course, improve stormwater generally through additional projects that might not otherwise happen. I'm going to vote in favor of this because I'd like to see it get started, although I agree with Commissioner Barnett. I would like to see us continue to discuss it and perhaps tweak it and improve it and go forward so that we actually meet the goal of the twofold goal I just described. If there are no other questions or comments, roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Matter passed unanimously. That brings us to item D. 8D as in David. Do I have a motion to authorize the purchase of 7 replacement vehicles?
Mayor Tully, I motion to approve the purchase of 7 4x4 vehicles as directed by Village Council.
Second.
Any questions or comments from members of the audience on this item? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Commissioner Durkin?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'm the one who had asked that this be tabled at the last meeting and have staff look further into the
purchase of all vehicles to be 4x4 versus the option of having 2 of the 7 to be the 2-wheel drive. Just want to report out that by purchasing all 7 vehicles as 4-wheel drive, it will be easier for staff to convert the vehicle to a compressed natural gas. So it's easier to be done when it's a 4x4 versus a 2x4. And my personal opinion, feeling is that when these were to go on resale value, will be higher and we'll get more money when we go to sell them as a used vehicle once it's met its life expectancy here at the village. So I will be supporting this.
And just a point of clarification, we'll take that motion to mean all 4-wheel drives on the Tahoes and the sedan will be standard.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Do you need clarification on that?
No, we'll take it as that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It was just clarified. Other questions or comments, Commissioner Olson?
So, you know, from my perspective, I really have, you know, not a huge amount of opinion on this issue, but I do want to just encourage staff that to find ways for cost savings in the future. I mean, I know this is increasing the cost. It's not a hugely significant increase, but I don't want, and while I don't necessarily feel very strongly on this issue, I am concerned that if we try to only purchase these larger, more equipment, better equipment is great, but only if it's needed. And you know, the original staff recommendation, I would have supported the original staff recommendation because if staff felt that that was appropriate, I think that it's a good balance between the need for the equipment, but also the need to be fiscally responsible with our tax dollars. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnett. Thank you, Commissioner.
Just procedurally here, do we need to actually amend this motion? You know, we've got an actual listed recommended purchase price. It was, I think, motioned as, you know, as presented, right? So do we need to?
I actually didn't say that on purpose.
We take the motion as purchase 6 2014 Chevy Tahoe 4-wheel drive utility vehicles and 1 4-door Ford Fusion hybrid.
Okay, all right.
Commissioner Doucette?
I'll just add, since we're talking about 4-wheel drive trucks, I think Commissioner Durkin's point about resale is valid, but, you know, the actual use of the vehicles in winters like this and in other situations, I know Commissioner Barnett and I talked about this today, the use of the tool as the vehicle for the police department and the fire department really is their office, and it's their office on wheels. And when that office can move through different terrain and different weather, it really allows them to get to the scene of emergency calls and public safety calls quicker and more safely, which will always help our residents. So I agree with this. I think it's a smart idea to go with all 4-wheel drive vehicles. If there was a 4-wheel drive sedan, I would suggest we get that too, but I don't think we have one of those on the market right now. So that's all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Commissioner Jose?
I'll keep it brief, but I agree with Commissioner Durkin and Commissioner Neustadt. It increases the resale value. It's safer for our employees. I think it's the right way to go. Thanks.
Ditto.
There we go. I didn't want everyone to feel like they hadn't spoken. I don't have a problem with the amendment. It's an increase of about $8,700 from the purchase price, which was originally recommended to be just over $200,000. This is still well within the budget for these purchases. I don't have a problem with it, and I understand the recommendation with respect to the added value that has been described by my colleagues. The only thing I will just point out is that I know we throughout the year try very hard to continue to impress upon both staff and the entire organization to be as lean as possible and to spec things out for what is absolutely necessary and no more and no less. And if this is what staff had spec'd out, I'm confident they went through that process and ordinarily would be in favor of what was recommended because of why it was recommended, knowing that it came as part of that lean process. That's the only comment that I will add. I don't have a problem here because I'm satisfied with the reasons been given as to why the additional expenditure would add additional value and options for these vehicles for our organization. But I think we need to be careful going forward about what messages we're sending.
I agree wholeheartedly.
That's all I have on that. In which case, I'll ask for a roll call, please.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Nay.
Commissioner Rankin? Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Matter passes 6-1. It brings us to item 9, our first reading or our workshop agenda. We have several items for presentation and discussion tonight. Our first reading or the workshop portion of our meeting is designed for informal discussion of items that may or may not be voted on at a later point in time. It is customary for village staff to introduce the items for discussion, and we'll start with item 9A, and I'll turn things over to Village Manager Fieldman for presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. The first item for consideration is a motion recommending intersection design to the County of DuPage for the intersection of 55th and Webster. And here to present background information on this item is our Public Works Director, Nan Newland.
Good evening.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. I'd just like to give you a little bit of background as to what, kind of the context of what this discussion is about, why we're here tonight talking about this item at this time and what it means going forward. We have a large project that's underway at the moment. We talked about it maybe a year ago when we brought a local agency agreement before you with DuPage County. And they have undertaken the design of a significant improvement to 55th Street between Williams to the east and Dunham Road to the west. So it's an extensive project. It includes intersection improvements at Fairview and Main with the addition of left turn lanes, the intersection, resurfacing of 55th through that section, as well as traffic signal coordination along that area, similar to work that was done to the east in Westmont a couple of years ago. This is a DuPage County project, as I said. The purpose is to improve traffic flow and safety along this corridor, and it is being done with federal funding. Because it's federal funding, it has to go through a pretty extensive process, I should say. They call the first segment Phase 1 engineering, which is also called a project development report, a PDR, lots of acronyms in the whole process. It includes a very extensive description of existing conditions like traffic, crashes, geometry, pedestrians, traffic signal operations, kind of the whole gamut. It also includes what improvements that are being proposed, and that's really why we're here tonight, to talk about one of the aspects of the design that's being proposed. It also talks about right-of-way and cost estimates. And really, it's kind of a whole scoping document that goes to IDOT, Illinois Department of Transportation. They are the agency that implements the federal funding to make sure that we follow all the right procedures, design it in accordance with federal standards, and that it's all correct. Once this part of it is done, and we're going to be talking about one aspect of that report tonight, all that gets submitted to IDOT for their review and approval. And once they give us their initial blessing on that, the county, we will be hosting a public meeting to get comments from people that live along the project and other people in the community. After that's done, the county will move ahead with acquiring right-of-way slivers of property along the corridor where they need to do some widening. They'll complete engineering design, what they call Phase 2. That's really actually coming up with the construction drawings, the actual design that will go out to bid. IDOT will review it again and approve it, and then it'll go out for construction. With federal money involved, it's usually about a 5-year process from beginning to end, especially when there's right-of-way acquisition involved. So tonight, what we're talking about here is Webster Street, where it intersects with 55th Street. And this area shown on this exhibit is what we looked at in Neighborhood Traffic Study Number 1, which we started in 2010. And in 2011, we brought forward the data we collected in this study. We had extensive discussions with the neighborhoods. We made some changes to local traffic regulation. And we had a discussion with the residents on Webster about 2 issues, really, that they had concerns about. One is people who were going west on 55th and turning right on Webster to avoid getting backed up in the traffic at Main. So they're basically bypassing the intersection of Main and 55th. So they were seeing an increase in motorists, especially during the morning and evening rush hours going north there. The other concern they had was sight distance. So when they were turning in, people were turning in from 55th, either left or right, as well as turning out of Webster, they were concerned about the limited sight distance because of the hills, the change in elevation along 55th Street. So just a little close-up here of Webster at 55th. You can kind of see how it relates to the rest of the street layout here. And at that time, in late 2011, I think it was the first council meeting in 2012, staff did come before council and recommended that we implement a right in and right out with signage and enforcement here. And also discussed the pending county project on 55th and how this would be a temporary measure with signage only, because we couldn't do physical changes within the right-of-way at that time. The neighborhood asked that that item be tabled because they had a petition and were asking that the street be closed to all traffic. And at that time, they asked that the item be tabled until it was further reviewed with the county plan. Well, as I said before, the county plan is underway. They've done a lot of the initial engineering, and they have come back to staff with really two options. They've looked at the sight distance and they agree that there is a problem, limitations with sight distance turning in and out of this intersection. And they have, and remember, we're again in phase 1 engineering. This is still preliminary engineering. It's basically the geometry of the intersections they're going to show in the plan. And after that happens, it'll go to IDOT and then it'll come back for public comment. So it'll be what will be commented on by the neighbors and by the residents who use this street. So at this time, it's preliminary, whichever one we decide, and because this had come to council before, we thought it was important to bring it back to you to review and to weigh in on what we want to ask the county to include in this preliminary engineering. This is what the county's consultant recommended. It's a left out only. So if you're on Webster going south, you would be able to turn right and get access out onto 55th Street. You would not be able to turn, if you were eastbound on 55th, you wouldn't be able to turn left into Webster. If you were westbound on 55th, you wouldn't be able to turn right onto Webster. You wouldn't be able to turn into Webster at all from 55th or from Webster to the south, which would also be a right in and right out with a pork chop design. You would only be able to turn going south, turn right out of Webster. And that was because of the sight distance limitations on Webster itself turning left. So this was what they recommended, their consultant recommended when evaluating this. They philosophically don't have a problem with closing the street either, so that's why they came back to us knowing that the petition had been submitted and that the village had prior consideration of both requests. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Just to be clear, the specific options that the county has asked us to weigh in on, and therefore the council, is this design here, right out only, or a dead end, where the north leg of Webster would dead end in front of 55th Street there. They do not have any sketches or designs on that yet. If the council were to direct us to work with the county to draw that intersection, we would, by the time we have the neighborhood meeting, have some sketches and preliminary design on that. But there's no sketch of the dead end, but those are the two options that are available.
At this point, thank you. At this point, basically the county is looking for our input as to what we would like to, we, the Village of Downers Grove, would like to see included in the preliminary plans for that intersection.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, obviously, one of the things that was very important when this was last before us is we didn't know what the county's plans were, even to this degree of detail, and there was some hesitancy to try to make decisions in a vacuum if they were all going to be for naught or not possible or whatnot. So it's greatly appreciated. This is now back at a point where we know what the county is willing to do, whether there's land acquisition involved, and now they're basically asking us to present them with our views on one of two options. Just all things considered, if we, as I understand it, it's basically 6 of this, half dozen of the other, and we know what the wishes of the neighborhood are, my inclination would be to recommend to the county that they put in a dead end. if that's feasible. But I don't know what the rest of the council thinks.
Dead end.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Any different thoughts from anyone?
Well, I would disagree.
Please do it in workshop as we're discussing it.
My opinion on this is a very long street to be considered a dead end. Certainly understand the concerns raised by the neighborhood, but what I like about what this preliminary design that's shown on the screen now is it avoids and prohibits the cut-through right turn onto Webster to move around the intersection. I think that's a good thing. But I think the issue of access on Webster, it'd be a very long street to have a dead end, and if we don't have a full cul-de-sac for equipment turning around and larger vehicles, I think that's a concern of mine. And I think what this county plan shows is something that both addresses the neighborhood concerns with the traffic, but also still allows the ease and the movement of traffic and things like snow plows and emergency vehicles more easily than if it were a full dead end. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Thanks, Commissioner Rankin.
I guess I would say that, you read this recommendation or report from Burns and McDonnell, and they're a con, they have some pros and they have cons, but they're still indicating that it's not a perfect situation. So you have 2 imperfect situations, one being emergency vehicles, garbage trucks backing up, or the right turn out. So why wouldn't we listen to what the neighbors are asking us to do, since they're both imperfect anyway? So that's my take on it.
Yeah, that was actually kind of the way I looked at it, is there's public safety issues either way. You still have, even with what's up on the screen, and I realize that's just a sketch, it's probably a notch or 2 above napkins and crayons, I get that. But even that proposal still doesn't fully address the sightline issues, and that is a really tough spot, I can tell you. So it's that versus what, as Commissioner Olson points out, there's certainly issues with equipment backing up and whatnot, which is a different kind of potential public safety issue. But that's why I said earlier, but 6 of this, half dozen the other. I've long said, or maybe I've borrowed somebody else, that tie goes to the neighborhood as far as I'm concerned. But I sort of share your analysis, Commissioner Rankin. Commissioner Jose?
Thanks, Mayor. I think Commissioner Olson raises some good points in that you do have to be concerned about traffic backing up. I'm thinking not so much about snow plows, because hopefully we don't have another winter like this for a while, but you never know. And hopefully you don't need a fire engine in your neighborhood anytime soon. But my concerns are more garbage trucks, recycling trucks, that sort of thing. But if the neighborhood is comfortable with that added public safety concern in order to eliminate this public safety concern, I'm fine with it. Thanks, Mayor.
Commissioner Snap.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. This block has had a lot of patience with our village, and they've been before us for going back to 2011 now. One of the interesting points about this block is there's 100% support for the dead end from the neighbors. And to Commissioner Jose's point, I think the neighborhood will adapt and adjust to garbage trucks having to back up and maneuver down the roadway. That happens once a week. And, hopefully we don't have fire and snow as much down that roadway, so.
They can pick up trash on Main Street during rush hour, they can pick it up on Webster.
That's right. So, I'm in favor of this, and I think that it's important to note that this neighborhood, these residents have been, again, very patient, but also very respectful of our process. They've seen the connection to this county project, and it's been a long time in waiting. And, I'm actually interested in seeing how this works out. I like the dead-end option. I think it gives the roadway a lot of safety from the turning. A turning collision or a turning crash coming out of Webster is pretty dangerous. And we've had a few there, so that's a big concern of mine. And that's not just the neighborhood, that's visitors, that's other Downers Grove residents using that as a cut-through. So I think this dead end would eliminate a lot of potential problems. The right turnout still has that sightline issue as is identified in the Burns and McDonald report here. So I'll be supporting the dead end, and I think there's always going to be a lot of items on both sides of a story like this, but in this case, I'm going to support the dead end and thank all my colleagues for their hard consideration on this issue. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Barnett?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm all in on the dead end. I've been on that bus for a long time. But I had a couple of questions just to the process, I think, more than anything. One of them was, what we're going to do in the near future is make a recommendation to the county telling them what we'd prefer. They may or may not include it that way, correct?
In the preliminary?
Yeah.
Yes, they will.
They will, for sure?
They're willing to go ahead with either recommendation.
Okay.
Yep.
The reason I ask that is because if they hold a neighborhood meeting after they've done a preliminary design that's gone to IDOT, it seems like there's a lot of momentum there that I wouldn't want to be trying to counter, if you will. And the other one's just kind of a question. It doesn't change my opinion of wanting to recommend closing the street at all. But I'm curious, in the comment from Burns McDonald, they talk about some right-of-way purchase required on the kind of the northwest corner of Webster and 55th as a function of even accommodating this. And so looking at these maps and the fact that they're considering right-of-way purchase there, is there any opportunity to have them still do some right-of-way purchase and end up with a little bit of a turnaround, not a cul-de-sac, but a hammerhead kind of a thing?
The right-of-way purchase the county's talking about, you can kind of see on this diagram, it's just a very minor corner cut
It's like the
to make that
sidewalk
radius and sidewalk happen. The county is going to approach it as purchasing the minimum amount of right-of-way they need in order to accomplish the project.
Could our staff do a sketch and decide whether or not that was important to them? Or would you rather not get into it?
We can certainly discuss it with them. We have before as well.
I don't know the answer, but as I'm looking at that, it looks like there's space there that could accommodate such a thing.
Right, to that point, if, once it is communicated to the county engineers that our preference is, as it seems to be, a dead end, they might sketch something that may or may not answer your question. But
Fair enough.
I agree, we gotta find out.
And these are the types of things that will go back and forth between preliminary design and final design and neighbor comments. So we'll take the direction that we're hearing and work with the county, and they'll come up with some ideas, some sketches, some with right-of-way, some without, and we'll see where it ends up in the final design.
Sure. And of course, I think Commissioner Bryant's real question is, it will be included in the preliminary design, but will it actually be constructed is another question.
That's a whole different set of
That's
answers.
a whole other
there.
question.
I had an additional question I didn't pick up. Were you done?
I am.
Okay. So when you say a 5-year timeline, do you mean back from 2011 or do you mean starting now?
2011 typically, the phase one is taking a little longer than it typically does, and they haven't started any right-of-way acquisition. Right-of-way can take as long as 2 years to go through the IDOT process. So it could be another 3 to 4 years.
Well, we know what that's like. You better, sure. Well, while everybody is noodling on that, I'll ask if there's any questions or comments from any members of the audience. Bailey, please.
Frank Falish, 820 Prairie.
Good evening.
I can see a solution. Have a do not enter sign and a right turn only sign on the north thing and a no left turn on the south portion of the road. Case solved.
And you'll waive your traditional consultant's fee? Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments from members of the audience? Good evening.
Good evening. Mike Ruda, 5405 Webster. I think the only comment I want to make this evening was in regards to Commissioner Olson's comments about the right turn only, addressing most of the issues. One thing I think that may have gone unmentioned is occasionally we also receive some of the overflow traffic off of Washington Street during rush hour, usually the afternoon rush hour when traffic backs up on Washington. A lot of times people looking for an easier way out to turn right and head west, people come down Webster. So, you know, I think an important thing to consider here is also the right turn can sometimes be an issue in the afternoon. Also, according to the engineering numbers from AASHTO or whoever the group that determines what's safe and what's unsafe, the right turnout is still, you know, by rights. There's not enough sight line to make a safe right turn out of Webster. And one could argue that maybe when they do the construction improvements, they might lower the grade of the road. I don't know if they will or not, but something worth considering anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from members of the audience on this item? Any last questions or comments from members of the Village Council?
Is that just the town we're trying to win?
We're responsive. Your Village Council, that work, changing on the fly. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
The next item is consideration of an ordinance authorizing a special use for an automobile dealership at 2100 Ogden Avenue. Here to present background information on this petition is our Community Development Director, Tom Daberon.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. A special use ordinance has been prepared for an automobile dealership at 2100 Ogden Avenue. We're looking for approval on the March 11th, 2014 active agenda. Inside the red box is the location of the property that we're talking about. That's 2100 Ogden. It's a little over 4.5 acres in size. The principal building, the larger building there, is 20,000 square feet. The small one, an accessory structure, is about 2,300 square feet. That's the view from Google Earth, the street view. Very quickly, this was a former Chrysler dealer until January 2012. The dealership was is allowed as a special use in the B3 district, where it resides now. In our zoning ordinance, section 28.1202, once that activity on the site has lapsed more than 18 months, special use must be reestablished before they can start a new auto dealership. That's why we're here tonight. Pretty much that simple. It's really only proposing cosmetic improvements, so all the same zoning bulk requirements are met. It's consistent with the comprehensive plan in terms of corridor commercial and auto orientation. Plan Commission considered this at their February 3rd meeting. Believe that it meets all of the special use standards from section 28.1902 and recommended approval unanimously. Staff concurs. Be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you. So just so I'm clear, we're taking an automobile dealership and it wants to be an automobile dealership. Correct.
That's that simple.
Okay. Just want to be really clear on it. Questions or comments from any members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Commissioner Barnett?
What are they going to be doing? Do we know what they're going to be doing in terms of aesthetic or landscape kinds of adjustments?
I'm having trouble hearing you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Tom. Are there, obviously, as the mayor put it, to go from an automobile dealership to an automobile dealership is a pretty straightforward thing. But there's a certain amount of, they have to be asking for a special use and be granted the special use. And I guess I'd like to have some confidence that they were going to be doing some things to improve the lot. I look at other dealers who have done some work, widened parkways, for example. There's whether or not there's any stormwater work that's anticipated to be done to improve the situation. It's basically nothing but pavement right now. Is there any contemplation of that's been given to us, or?
No, at this time, really, other than the lots deteriorated over time, things like that, and making those kinds of maintenance-oriented improvements, and then some cosmetic improvements to kind of update the look of the building. Nothing more than that at this time.
Okay, it seems like they ought to be offering to do a little bit more to me.
Do we have the ability to ask them to do what Bob's asking? You know, improvements to the building, landscaping, green space?
Yes, you can place conditions on the special use. Generally, those conditions would be rooted in compliance with the zoning ordinance, and this application complies as presented.
We have
Right.
5 acres of pavement out there, and we're taxing everybody to try and fix our stormwater utility. It just seems to me to be an opportunity to try and start a process by which we have higher expectations. I'd like us to think that through.
Fair comment, and I agree that ideally it would be the situation that any new use would be an improvement in some respect over the prior use. And that's going to be measured in different ways. Here, taking something that's currently fallow and not producing any sales tax revenue and turning it into something it does is a major improvement in my opinion. The aesthetic improvements are also improvements. I agree if we could also get stormwater improvements, even if not required, greenscape improvements, even if not required, that would be great. I was looking to see if there were any issues, how much this already meets with setbacks and things of that nature, and floor area ratio and all that other stuff. I have a feeling, I can't find it right now, that it's already meets it with cushion.
Right.
So it isn't as though they're right up to the limit or a little bit over, and we're saying, well, it was already like that, let's leave it alone, where we have an opportunity to make it comply. It is compliant now, and as mentioned, I believe, with some cushion in various different measures. So it's not as though they're even taking up all the bulk space, and I can't find the statistics, but that's my recollection. I think that your points are well taken, Commissioner. I think what we would need to do is we would have to have something in place where we change the requirements in the first place. So if someone were operating this as a special use, and we changed, and they were reading everything, and then we changed the requirements for whatever, pervious area, whatnot, then obviously they would have to meet those requirements when they came in for another special use. I'm completely supportive of your sentiment. I'm just struggling with how to do it in a way that would be not discouraging of putting parcels back to a productive use, which is, I think, what we really want to see here on Ogden Avenue.
Well, part of it is our, process, and I guess we have to some degree, have to have some confidence in the dialogue that's going to go forward. But if this were an empty parcel, and somebody were applying for the special use to turn an empty parcel into an auto dealer, we'd have a whole different set of expectations. And technically meeting setbacks would be one thing, but we'd be looking for and expecting a lot of work.
Right.
And I certainly understand the sentiment that a fallow piece of ground put into a sales tax producing auto dealership is a huge benefit for the village. But I think we should be looking for an opportunity, and I get the point that we should be changing perhaps some of those rules ahead of the game. We're not anywhere close to getting our work done, Mayor. With all due respect, this council's ability to do anything on the periphery that comes up is essentially nil. And so, when might that kind of a conversation occur? Is just not even a conversation we're prepared to have. So I'd just like us to start talking about these situations when they come up with a higher degree of expectations.
Well, then my point is that we then need to actually document what those expectations are. If it's amount of stormwater detention, then we need to change the stormwater rules. If it's greenscape, we need to change the greenscape rules. Because the problem is, if this were a empty lot right now, they would be coming before us for the special use, meeting all requirements with room to spare, and we'd be hard pressed to tell them no, because they're meeting all requirements.
Well, the good news is we rarely have an opportunity where a commissioner says, boy, I wish we had the opportunity right now to have this discussion. And the next item on the agenda is exactly that.
So who set up the order of the agenda?
Clearly, Tom did. I think he did a great job in that.
Which is where I was going, is the next item that we need to make the changes, not here.
Let's table this until we talk about the next item.
Well, no, Commissioner Olson would say we can't table it, we're going to go to the next item. Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, I certainly respect and agree that the improvements are fantastic. My concern is, this community, I think this council would agree that this community wants to be business friendly, and the more and more regulation on what you have to do, and you have to do this and that, it becomes very challenging. And I do think, with all due respect to Commissioner Barnett, comparing it to if there were nothing there, you know, greenfield development versus redevelopment is just completely different. And I'm very supportive of this item. Without any modification, I think it applies, and I just hesitate to go so far as to require it. I mean, I encourage our staff to have a dialogue with the developer to encourage some of these things that we would like, but in going so far as to require them is just, it's a hard step to take from my perspective, because I really do want to be open to businesses coming in and saying, oh, Downers Grove is a good place to be because I can open my business and I don't have to spend so much capital improving the site that becomes prohibitive for me to open in Downers Grove. You know, that's just my concern, and I don't want us to, I think they're laudable goals, but we have to keep in mind the reality of business and attracting business into our town.
It's about achieving a balance.
Correct.
Of course, if all that impermeable area there, I'm sure we could probably figure out what their stormwater fee is, which they'll be paying into the system. So there's a built-in incentive to actually have less.
There's no reason for anyone, whether it's the K Group in this moment or anybody watching at home who might want to put a business here, to think that Downers is somehow either non-competitive or anti-business, or even pursuing regulations that are far more burdensome than any kind of competitive market, because we are in a competitive market, and those around us are, we're certainly not, there's no evidence, no reason to believe we are hurting ourselves by what we're doing right now in terms of competition for ability to encourage or to attract development. And this, mayor's the old guy up here, but there's 12 or 14 or 16 years of pretty solid Downers Grove leadership towards trying to foster economic development, from whether it's the very model that we use today, which in itself is unique and was a step forward and a step out. So I don't think anybody's trying to create an environment that's anti-business by any stretch, but in the same breath, we're loading up on fees elsewhere, and we can't. It just seems hard for me to sit here and tell people we really gotta get you to pay that fee, and then talk in our next breath about how we want to change those rules and not be talking about it when we have a chance. So if we can't do it in this one because people don't feel like it's right, sort of the horse is out of the barn, I can accept that. But it's another example to me of why the next conversation is so important.
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to a very robust conversation, the next item, when all these concepts are brought forward, because I think that's exactly where they should be. And to the extent that, if I was going to characterize what I think you're trying to say, is that if we can be that and, we want to foster a robust economic development market which attracts and retains high-quality businesses to our community and sustains our tax base so we can keep the impact upon our residents to a minimum. Absolutely. At the same point in time, we can improve stormwater and greenscaping. Sure, let's see if we can do and. I couldn't think of any other community that's going to pull that off. It would be Downers Grove. But my point is here is that everything's being met with some extra space. So it's hard to sort of pick on these guys. I don't suggest that anybody's picking on that, and I've ignored several people to my right who want to say something. No?
Yeah, you made my point. They have an economic incentive to reduce the green space, or to increase the green space and reduce the impervious space, sorry.
Is this the same owner?
Yes.
Do we know if this is a new car dealer, a used car dealer? Because even if we don't know, the point is that if it's a new dealer, they're gonna get tax incentives, sales tax rebate incentives are standard that we do up and down Ogden Avenue. So,
This is not a new car dealership, this is a used car dealership, is my understanding.
but the special use doesn't tie to a used car. It's just, it can be an automotive.
Sales, yeah.
Any automotive sales,
Only
correct.
So
auto
if they
sales.
want to do new sales, they can.
And we would encourage that, that would be great.
Like Fisker, or what's that other, Tesla? Is that
Tesla
another
would be
battery
great, yes.
operated thing? Yeah. So, I knew it was gonna be tough to top the Lamborghini dealer. But hey, all sales are good.
Other comments, questions on the proposed special use? I'll just add, because it already, in its previous life, met all the criteria of the applicable provision of the code, it still does. It would seem to be a straightforward analysis. Any final questions or comments from the audience? Very good.
And the last item is the discussion of the very document that we were talking about in the last item, which is the zoning ordinance. This is a document that regulates land use and development in our community, including things like green space and setbacks and bulk requirements. We've been talking about this and presenting it since December of last year, and the staff presentations have concluded. We're, of course, here to answer any questions you may have, but tonight we really thought would be a great opportunity to have the council have a dialogue, raise questions or concerns. And so with that, Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, and I think it would be very hard to beat the introduction that preceded it. I want to thank staff for the presentation, particularly Mr. Dave Reiner, over the last number of weeks, months. We've sort of been joking about it's been zoning 101, land use 102, but I think it's been a terrific presentation. It's really gotten down into the details in a way that we can all get our heads wrapped around. And I know we all sat here and listened very intently, had some questions along the way, and made some comments, but I would really encourage everyone, if they weren't already intending to share their passions, their issues, their concerns, their wants, their needs, now's the time to discuss them and get them out. The other thing I would propose is that we don't necessarily have a debate on any particular idea, request, or suggestion. Let's get them out, let's collect them, make sure we understand them, and if there are questions to facilitate or foster that understanding, that would be great. If there's information that we need from staff in order to follow up on some questions or to determine what-ifs and things of that nature, I think that would be terrific, but I don't know if we necessarily are going to resolve every issue that everybody comes up tonight. But I would like very much to encourage everyone to the extent possible, not to say that this is your speak now or forever hold your peace moment, but to the extent possible, try to identify as many issues, wants, needs, concerns, hot button issues, whatever they might be. So I will throw the floor open to whoever would like to kick things off, and Commissioner Olson is halfway out of his chair already, so I'll start with him.
Thank you, Mayor. Two issues I want to raise right off the bat. First is drive-throughs in downtown. I believe they should be prohibited. I am a little unsure about the revised use table that is in the memorandum. If drive-throughs, if that has changed, because it certainly, it doesn't appear, it appears that drive-throughs are prohibited in that use table in the downtown. Is that?
They're prohibited.
Okay. Great.
All right, took one thing off your list.
That was great. The second thing is a little bit more, I think, perhaps a little bit more substantive, controversial. After the discussion, staff has proposed that we make the zoning regulations in R5 and R5A districts identical, and just basically say that both of them are the same. Personally, I don't really like that idea. With all due respect to those who brought it forward, I would prefer we have an opportunity here with this ordinance to streamline it, to clarify it, and to have two zoning districts that are duplicative of one another in a new, clarified, streamlined zoning ordinance would seem to be a bit counterintuitive from my perspective. And I do understand that eliminating one of those zoning classifications would require rezonings if the zoning district didn't remain. But I would prefer, I think that is an exercise that is, to me, would be appropriate to go through given what we're doing here with the zoning ordinance, because it's my opinion that I would hope that this zoning ordinance may not have to be rewritten for another 40 to 50 years, like the previous one lasted for a very long time in its general format. So that would be the other issue that I would raise initially. That's all I have for the time being.
Who wants to go next? Go for it. Commissioner Rankin?
So can we ask questions based on what?
This is a workshop. You can,
Whatever you want to do.
whatever you want to do.
All right, so what kind of cost would be associated with doing what Commissioner Olson was suggesting?
Staff time for preparing the agenda items, notices. We could get you a more specific answer. We would have to rezone any of the properties in a district that would no longer exist. Each of them would have to be notified, all plus notice in the paper and signs up, things like that. So we can quantify that for you in the next several weeks.
Well, I think that's kind of important to know because
Yep.
I understand what you're saying. It seems very logical, but if the cost of
I agree.
people's time
That would be
is significant, you know,
that would be helpful to know that information.
yeah. But it makes sense on its face. I think I've mentioned the things that I was interested in having further discussion on before, but I'll just mention them because this is the format. So in the new ordinance, there is a proposal to require bike racks for new businesses. I just think that while that's a nice thing to do, I don't know if it's a necessary thing to do. I would hate to add another burden to a business owner when they're trying to open up a business, when they have to do fire alarms and signs and, you know, all those. There's so many costs that pile up and stack up, and that's just adding one more. Even though that a bike rack may not be a significant cost, it's all dollars and cents, and it matters, so.
How's that contemplated even working? I mean, there's a huge number of businesses where it wouldn't even make any sense or have a logical physical footprint for such a thing. How do the folks that advocate that, and how do we see that? How's that really realistically happen?
It would be on development or significant improvements on a property basis, not a tenant basis. And so that it would really take place in areas that have the space as part of a bigger project. And the requirements are pretty minimal. It's a small number of bikes that would be required to be parked. And we looked up on the internet when Commissioner Rankin and I had this discussion. Some of the bike racks can be as price range of about $149, that kind of thing. So it would be on a property basis, not a tenant basis, part of a redevelopment or reinvestment of a project, and that's how we envision that working.
Would there be areas of the community that wouldn't be subject to it?
I think the downtown area and certain elements where it's not conducive, I think is the how that would be applied. And I'm waiting for Tom to say something to me if I got it wrong.
No, it generally kicks in when you've got a larger parking lot to begin with. It doesn't, individual businesses, you know, that don't have parking to begin with aren't going to be subject to this requirement. It's, if you've got a larger parking area and parking demand, then that kicks in.
So it would be driven by parking lot requirements as part of a parking
lot
issue, yes.
Well, and I think, that's what I'm trying to look for. I mean, wasn't it also including like commercial uses? And to me, I don't know, I mean, maybe people that.
Why don't we get you a written response to that and tell you exactly how we envision applying it?
Could you use an example of a current project or something that's happened recently that would have triggered the requirement?
We will.
Thank you.
And not to make it extremely difficult, but I think what Commissioner Barnett's point on different areas of town is particularly relevant. I'm just pulling out this map, and you think about downtown versus perhaps the Esplanade area or those Office Park north of Butterfield Road versus, maybe 75th and Lamont Road commercial. Does seem to there's different areas of town perhaps would be different.
Yeah, and since it's triggered by a parking lot requirement, then if you don't have a parking lot like in the downtown, you wouldn't be subject to the requirement.
Right. But if you have, if you had an office building, you would be subject to it.
Yes.
Okay.
And we already have that requirement for office buildings in town, so this is really just a clarification and some addition.
Would it be required in new multifamily development?
Why don't we'll get you a complete report on exactly when it would be required and how it would be applied and what triggers it.
Thank you. And then my other question was, or my other concern is, and I understand that we've done things in numerous fashions in the history of Downers Grove, but moving to a model where all the variations have to go through the Zoning Board of Appeals instead of allowing the Plan Commission to hear variations along with the project that they're voting on. It seems to me that you're going to increase the cost to the petitioner. You're going to increase the time it takes a petitioner to...
Oh, not requiring that.
Well, right now, the suggestion is to move it that all variations would go through the ZBA. I don't know if that's...
I just want to make sure I
my opinion is that's not great.
Don't do that. Don't require that because it would require two separate proceedings.
Two separate proceedings, additional costs of time, additional staff time, I would imagine, to prepare items for two separate hearings.
I agree.
That's all I had.
So on some of those kinds of things, you're going to get questions tonight, and you're going to get questions next week, and some of what I'd be really interested in is Commissioner Neustadt said, like with the bike parking thing, give us an example. It'd be the same kind of a thing, a little narrative to help us understand the answer, and when Becky's got that question, if this kind of thing, and here's why we think that's a good thing. A little narrative as opposed to just a short answer to help us get our arms around the context of the decision making. Would be helpful.
You mean sort of like ABC company or ABC developer under the old ordinance would do the X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
Under the current proposal, they would have to do something else, D, E, and F.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually had that same concern at first, but the more I thought through it and talking with some folks on the ZBA and talking with staff, I think it's helpful from the standpoint of having consistency in who's applying the code to determine what the variance is, and making sure that we're not, having too much variance in our granting of variances. And at the same time, I think the addition of time won't be too much because it's the way we've got the meetings set up. Excuse me. I'm still fighting a bit of a cold. The zoning board, I think, meets the last Wednesday, and the Plan Commission meets the first Monday. So there's usually not much of a time lag, and hopefully most of the materials would be useful for both meetings. That said, there are still two meetings to go to, so there is still an added expense. I do recognize that. So, yeah, that is a concern. But I think, from our standpoint, in terms of getting consistency in application of the code, I think we gain enough there to make it worthwhile. My two concerns chiefly when it came to the rewrite of the zoning code were increasing neighbor notice, especially with regard to commercial projects that were near residential neighborhoods. I think we've done a good job at expanding that by mandating neighborhood meetings for that sort of thing, and increasing the mail notice. I think those are two very good steps, and I'd like to thank you for that. And the second concern I had was introducing more of the ability for staff to approve of small variances in order to save developers time, maybe lessen the burden on the Plan Commission, on the ZBA a little bit, and I like that we've gone in that direction. So, overall, I think it's a good document, easier to use, and I thank everybody for all their time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other comments, suggestions, criticisms? Commissioner Barnett? I didn't end with that word on purpose.
It's a tough crowd.
It's a
It's a
workshop.
good thing you're not going there. Back to kind of what David was talking about, I'd like to mention this before. I think when we were talking about the development on Dunham, kind of behind the S-curve, it seems like to me, even though it's additional work and additional expense, that this is a real opportunity for us to consider not only rezoning those that have changes, but to look at our map and ask ourselves whether or not the zoning that's there is the one we really wish were there. I suspect that's not a ton of places, but we got opportunity, I think, because we're not going to be a year and a half from now. It's unlikely we're going to be like looking for stuff to do. And yet we're in this knee deep, and so I suspect that whether it's this council or its staff or even even neighbors themselves, there's going to be some known places in town that, knowing what we know today, knowing what we know with the comprehensive plan, that we wish weren't zoned the way they were. And I'd like us to be taking this exercise a little bit further and consider those properties, and we could avoid some headaches down the road. We've done some really good stuff between, the comp plan work that we've done. Let's apply that. Let's take an opportunity to apply that, is what I would say that we should add to sort of the list of stuff associated with this actual process here. I think it fits, and I just see us struggling to find time to get into it.
I agree.
I would agree with that too. I mean, we have heard over and over, well, it's zoned this, and the neighbors are upset. We've heard these kind of things. So why not fix something while we're in the middle of addressing these issues, anyways? And maybe it's a monetary thing. I think back to like when we were in. Incorporating those people into Downers Grove, the unincorporated properties, and we looked at, some were, okay, well, we could do this and it wasn't that big of a risk. And then there's some where maybe people would be challenging those rezonings, right? So, or incorporation. So maybe that's kind of how we look at it. Like, there's some that the people that own that property, they wouldn't even care if it was switched, right?
And there are areas that I think residents would prefer to have a different zoning. For example, single-family homes built in an area zoned for townhomes. I think people who live in single-family homes in an area built for townhomes might be concerned that if somebody bought several of the properties, could by right build townhomes on a property next to a single-family home development. It's a concern. And I think those people would be happy about a change.
Just from a procedural standpoint, the concept of village-initiated rezonings is a different action than adopting an amended zoning ordinance, and we could do those independently before or after. That sounds like a high-priority action item for the next round. It's definitely related, especially with the proposal in R5, R5A that's actually on the table. But just wanted to clarify that those are two related but separate legislative items. It would take a different, a lot of research on that as far as strategy as well.
Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, I understood that. I guess I was just saying it's, it's similar topics and.
Clearly similar topics and sort of a natural discussion from comp plan to zoning ordinance to implementation. Absolutely.
Other burning issues?
Not for the moment.
Matters of utmost urgency?
Not for the moment.
Well, we have
Okay.
just a handful of items that we can get back to using examples and story formats to explain the issue, and we'll get those turned around rather quickly.
Well, if you got the same list that I do, there's some things to follow up on, and then I would get, and in a moment I'll ask if there's any questions or comments from any members of the audience. To continue to facilitate the process, not that something that's, how many years in the making? Needs to be done immediately, but if there are additional comments and thoughts, I would encourage everyone to bring them forth as expediently as possible so we can continue to make the good progress that we have.
I do have another one. On the subject of setbacks and lot coverage things, what we have here is our current thinking on the matter, right? But what I don't have that I'd like to have, and I don't want to create a research project, so if it's not easy, then I guess probably I don't need it. But some relative comparison of the information. So this is our team's best thought, right? But what's the rest of the world say? And what are the extremes that are out there? Sort of boundaries on typicals and acceptables and things like that. Because the subject of stormwater in particular, to stick with that theme, is one that has dominated this community's budget, this community's politics for a decade, Mayor?
At least.
At least. And so it's related, without doubt, to things like lot coverage and green space. And so I'd be curious if our group had, or could solicit from DMMC quickly and easily, comparative stuff. What the people that are really going out on a limb on those subjects, what are they doing? I'd like to know that. I'd like to understand that better.
Just to clarify, the items for comparison: impervious area, lot coverage area, minimum landscaping and buffering requirements in all districts, residential, commercial,
Yeah.
all districts.
Yeah.
What I was going to suggest is a few things. One, I guess the question is, you have to start with somewhat comparable community. If you were in Williamsburg, obviously there's going to be a whole set of rules that don't apply to us. If you're going to be in other parts of the country, there's going to be geographic issues. I would assume what you're talking about is if you can find something at the community that's more or less kind of like ours in terms of its characteristics, which we do for other purposes, and just provide an example of what does this look like. Of course, none of them will be anywhere near as good as the one that we just put together. But with that huge caveat, maybe that would be, rather than trying to create a research project, maybe it's more of a pointing, like you might want to look at this, this, and this, and draw some comparisons, try to make it easier on staff and yet still get you what you're looking for.
Yeah, maybe.
And then also maybe even, I'm remembering in some contexts, back when we did the residential redevelopment discussion, there was a lot of that at that time, and maybe it's a matter of just pointing Commissioner Barnett to that research that was done. This was back when the residential market was extremely hot, and there were a lot of remodels and teardowns and things like that. And this question was, well, what can we do in terms of lot coverage and floor area ratio and roof pitches? And I know that's not everything that you're talking about. Setbacks was part of it, and there was a good deal of, well, what do other communities have on that score? and maybe at least that's just something that wouldn't require any work, but it would be a starting point, and it might even then make it easier for you to identify what it is you want to see.
Well, part of what
And then, of course, Tom has the Bible on zoning, which is like an ideal if you had 150 acres in the middle of nowhere, which is green space. How would you plan a community? You could just give that to Commissioner Brennan.
Just like Downers Grove.
You know, obviously we don't, right? But imagine if we were in Elmhurst and we were doing this and it was last year, and we said, as Elmhurst Village Council members, well, let's take a look at some of our comparable communities. What we would have gotten from Downers Grove is a 35-year-old piece of junk that resulted in a whole ton of problems that we're living with today. So I'm a little, we know sort of our comparable market areas around, but I don't know that I'm sure that that's what anybody wouldn't consider as best practices.
Do we know anybody that's recently gone through this exercise?
Yeah, I mean, that would be more interesting.
Didn't we-
If they had, that'd be way more interesting.
Didn't we get a lot of that from our consultant on the project? I mean,
I'm sure this is,
So this
has
is,
been done, as they would say, this has been done already. We just
Yeah,
need
this-
to get it.
we're reacting to this, we're hearing this for the first time. So a lot of this is setting the expectations
encouraged
and
us. This is
the
what
scope of
happens.
the project. Tom's whisper in my ear, some of this was sort of done in a general benchmarking, not so much of a table format of every district, all three items. So we'd like to kind of kick it around a little bit as staff, get back to you and maybe bounce some ideas off.
Sure, and I'm trying to make it easier for you, because I don't even think you need to actually sit down and, as you normally would do, is put it all in a nice, easy-to-read chart. I think you don't even need to put that much work into it. I think what Commissioner Brennan is saying is, if somebody's done this in the general vicinity of where we are in the Chicago metropolitan area, they've done it recently, that would probably be a pretty good start. And then maybe just peek back at the stuff we did during the residential redevelopment effort that was done, because some of what you're talking about is in there, not exactly, but some.
Yeah, some of that was setbacks, lot coverage in only residential districts, so for just us and I think two other towns, if my memory serves. So I'd like to work with you and try to, we understand the concept clearly.
Yeah.
It's a matter of just sort of balancing scope of the project time. This is one of those that could be as big or as small as we want to make it.
And
so
and I was actually making my suggestions to try to keep it relatively, more or less, go to aisle 3 checkout book on the 4th shelf kind of thing,
Yeah.
not put together a massive compilation of everything that's been done in the Chicago metropolitan area.
Sure.
But now you've piqued my interest.
Well, there's a lot of this that you read and without the context like Jeff was talking about, or without comparative context, it's like, oh, sure, why not? You know, but I don't know what that
some of that, I
means,
think,
you know?
doesn't some of that come from, my voice is really going away. This will be the last thing I say. Some of that comes from the sticky notes that Tom has on his desk of the last 10 years of his experience here. So while it might not be other communities, it's our community experience and what has needed to be modified, changed, looked at. Then that in combination with the comp plan and then the Duncan and Associates, our consultant, we start getting closer to, I think, what you're asking. That's the way I see it. And, you know, these guys are the professionals and they deal with this every day. And they can kind of forecast or they can crystal ball a little bit, and they've seen over time what we've experienced here. So I think a lot of this stuff is driven from our own personal experience, then kind of codified in the comp plan and now out there with the consultant's review as well. But to your point, if there is something that we don't even know about, it's worth looking at.
Yeah, it's a benchmarking exercise.
Yeah. That's it, I'm done talking.
We had a resident who's in the audience that had sent us some stuff about daycare. I don't know if you were going to speak on it, Mrs. Potts, or you know. Well, I didn't know if we should mention, because it was good ideas, and I don't know if you need to hear from me that I thought that was logical and thoughtful, or not.
Thank you for acknowledging that. I actually thanked Ms. Potts earlier for that research, but I didn't do it on the record, so thank you for pointing that out. Which we all have. Other questions or comments? Anything from the audience? I was looking for Mr. Falish in a very quick solution to all of this.
Tom LeCran, 545 Chicago Avenue. My concern is that back in the long-range planning days, it was brought up that we should be looking at our zoning ordinance, et cetera, so that we're not doing things which are counterproductive for, let's just say, stormwater management. Are we satisfied that what we're doing here and have done so far is following that goal? Specifically back to Commissioner Barnett brought that up at long-range planning, that we should be, is anything we're doing make it worse for stormwater? Because I think stormwater is the #1 thing in this village right now. We need to get it under control. So looking at this process, are we doing that? Is that part of it?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair question, and one that we can add to the list of, obviously, or maybe not so obviously, but I know that those concepts necessarily have to intertwine with one another, but your point is there anything that we're doing that would make it more challenging to meet stormwater ordinance requirements, whether the counties or any changes do we want to make to be more restrictive? Or are there opportunities in terms of things that we should be doing that would make the achievement of goals within our watershed improvement plan easier and less expensive by reflecting them here? And those are grandiose, sweeping statements, but I think you get the point.
Yeah,
I think that's a fair question.
The good news is, first of all, recognizing we're not dealing directly with the stormwater control ordinance, which is actually still on our list for high priority action items in this round. That's where we will directly address those issues. But indirectly through zoning, there are many things throughout this document. It was one of our #1 objectives in this. So having things like maximum parking ratios to limit unnecessary impervious area, more landscaping requirements to put more green space in parking lots, more buffering to put more green space on lots, the allowance for green improvements, including stormwater improvements that are encouraged under our stormwater utility. The list really goes on, and it started with the comprehensive plan and translates directly into many aspects of this zoning ordinance. So we're confident that, yes, we are promoting those activities, and we're confident that we're not doing anything that would inhibit those activities.
Because I had to chuckle to myself, because part of the zoning ordinance was to mandate a 10-foot wide driveway on every lot now. And I thought builders would have a problem with that, but I checked with some, and not a problem. They can still build the kind of house they want, even though they got a 10-foot wide, and put a garage in the back if they needed to. They can still build enough house. But it does add to the impervious area that's on your lot, because now you got to have a 10-foot wide driveway. It's a small thing. I understand why we've gone that way, but it's just, if you're looking at it, okay, now I got to have 10 feet if the driveway is, so for against 5, now we're going to collect more stormwater fee because we mandated that. So, plus it's runoff is more. It's not, because not everybody's going to be able to afford impervious pavers. They're expensive, Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the comment. Other questions or comments from members of the audience? And obviously, we will continue to discuss this. Any other final discussions, at least for tonight? Comments from any members of the council? Going forward, and if you had previously said it, I apologize, but next steps, when would be the next time that folks could expect that we would be discussing this subject?
It'll be in the coming weeks. We have some council meeting agenda management to do. We have a lot of high priority action items currently on the docket, so we'll get back to you and set some expectations.
A few weeks at least.
A week or two at least, and then we'll come back with answers in a little bit more of a story format with the examples that are easy to understand.
Terrific. Very good. Anything else?
And that is our first reading. Thank you.
I just want to go back, and after what Mr. LeCren said about the 10-foot driveway, I hadn't noticed that, so I need to take another pass through.
By all means.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Appreciate the discussion.
Yeah.
All right, that ends our first reading, our workshop portion of our meeting. That brings us to item 10, Mayor's Report. I have one thing with two subparts that I'd like to report out, as I periodically do. Speaking of stormwater, as the council knows, I serve as the District 3 representative to the DuPage County Stormwater Committee and have for some time. And there were a couple things that happened at this morning's meeting I wanted to share with you. I don't always report out on this because it's not always something I think it would be particularly pertinent to our community or of interest to the council. But two things. Number one, as you know, the county stormwater staff is continuing to work on the floodplain mapping update and has extended invitation to discuss the status of the county's proposed floodplain maps. Was sent to all the communities affected by the remapping work funded by FEMA, which includes the Village of Downers Grove, among others. Over the next couple of weeks, county staff will be meeting with representatives of the 19 different communities to discuss those maps, and I know that we will have and will continue to have input on that process, which is of great importance to our residents. These meetings that the county staff are hosting with communities and also conferences of governments like the DuPage Mayors and Managers Organization and others are opportunities for each community to see all the changes that have been made to the floodplain maps, especially in those watersheds that have had the models rerun from what was initially issued. When they first came out, there were some people that found themselves in the floodplain that weren't crazy about it, and there were questions that were asked, and the maps have been reworked, and that process will continue. So I just wanted to update everyone on that, and I know that we continue to have representation involved in that process and are fully engaged, but I just wanted to share that with everyone on the council. The other thing that I wanted to share, and everyone will find this very of great interest, particularly Commissioner Barnett, the DuPage County Stormwater Committee is in their process of stormwater management planning. So go back to, let's see, what were we all wearing in 2002? What was the hit song of the day? All kidding aside, the county is now engaging, bless you, is now engaging in the sort of process of what do we need to do, what do we have, what does it cost to maintain it as presently funded, if we were fully funding it, what could we do, and if we wanted to do what we really would like to do, what additional funding do we need? And they're starting that process of discussion. This morning, Director Tony Charlton gave basically the presentation in terms of what this will be in terms of discerning what their needs are, and was looking at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Tier 1 being sort of what are they doing today with existing funding, which by the way, of course, is underfunded and is eating into reserves at about $2 million a year. So even if they just sort of clip along at the pace they're at right now, there will be additional funds required. And again, don't shoot the messenger, I'm just communicating this to you. Tier 2 would be what if we were doing what our old plan from 20 years ago, I think it was 1989, what their watershed improvement plan basically said to do, which they're not doing everything, they're not at 100% of even that. What would it take in order to even meet that plan? And then Tier 3 would be, forget about the plan from 20 years ago, let's look at what we ought to be doing today and for the next 20 years, and what would that involve? So they're putting all that together, and they're going to meet with municipalities, they're going to meet with conferences of governments like DuPage Mayors and Managers and others. They're going to meet with everybody who they can possibly reach out to over the next 3 or 4 months, and then bring this all back to the Stormwater Committee. Rather than go through this in great, and let me just underscore it, this is the beginning of this discussion. So what we sort of did here in Downers Grove about 11, 12 years ago, from what I can tell, that's what the county is starting right now. There will be a presentation about this, what they're calling a program assessment, that I'm describing in very, very short detail on the county website under the DuPage County Stormwater Committee. And literally all we were told today is, here's what the assessment program will look like. We're going to be doing this, and then we'll be coming back to everyone and sharing what our plans are, what our findings are, get input. It may be that there are opportunities for regional projects that would assist different communities in what they're doing. There may be things that municipalities don't want the county to be doing. There may be things that municipalities want the county to be doing that they're not doing. Again, there may be opportunities to work on things like watersheds, which last thing I checked, do not start and stop at municipal boundaries. And I also found it interesting that of the watershed plans that the county has managed to complete under their 20-year-old plan that is underfunded, Three watersheds that they have not gotten to yet are all in Downers Grove. Our 3 watersheds are among the list of ones that they have not yet gotten to. So the question is, are there things that could be done that would benefit multiple communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I simply raised that as something that will be available on the county website soon, so everyone can look at it themselves and read it, and I would encourage you to do so. And then as this process continues, as a District 3 representative, I will not only continue to represent our interests in that process, but also try to bring back information the best I can to our community as it affects all of us. I just wanted to give everybody a heads up on that. And again, you don't have to take my word for it, you can look it up. It should be on the website shortly. And that's all I had on the mayor's report.
I think there's a public comment.
Questions on the mayor's report?
Not on the mayor's report.
Questions?
Actually, I just had a chance to process what you were talking about with the zoning ordinance, and I was wondering if I could make a comment.
Absolutely. May I, in exchange, may I have your name and address?
Marge Earl, 4720 Florence Avenue, Downers Grove. I'm a little bit confused because you guys have been, well, the zoning ordinance has been worked on for probably 6 months or so, if not more. It's been through, I know you've all had individual meetings. There have been 3 consecutive months worth of Plan Commission meetings. There have been months, or at least 3 different village council meetings where you've had a chance to ask questions and bring up information. Though granted, Commissioner Barnett did miss the last informational meeting on the zoning ordinance. And you all asked really good questions pertinent to 1 or 2 things that you might not have asked before on the zoning ordinance, with the exception of Commissioner Barnett, because if I'm understanding you right, you basically asked them to go back to the beginning and kind of start all over again. Am I misunderstanding what you're asking?
Pretty much, yeah. Let me clarify.
So you need them to go start all over again?
No, you said, are you misunderstanding? And I said, yeah, you pretty much are misunderstanding.
Okay,
I'll clarify
maybe
it
you
if
could
you'd like.
explain to me what you're asking.
So what is in there is a cleaning up and best of this team's understanding of things. And really my focus, as I said before, is primarily on lot coverage, stormwater-related issues. What I don't have for a basis to understand is whether or not there are communities comparable to Downers Grove, as the mayor was pointing out, in terms of maturity and development, because obviously we're not Oswego.
Right.
Where there are, let's call it extraordinary efforts made through zoning to try and improve the condition of stormwater management. So are there situations in communities that are developed and mature like Downers is, where they've gone through zoning rewrites and decided to extend themselves, or stretch, if you will, the rules associated with those stormwater-related issues of coverage, FAR, impervious areas, setbacks, green space, et cetera, in an effort to try and bolster or support way better stormwater management techniques. Most of what is in this document supports our stormwater utility goals, as well as our comprehensive plan. Those are good things. What I'd like to know before I commit the village to a plan that is unlikely to get real regular review based on our history is whether or not there are sort of further reaches that could be done and are being done elsewhere to support those stormwater goals.
Something like a tree ordinance?
Sorry?
Something like a tree ordinance? Because that's a logical offshoot.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's
I mean,
one.
I know, well, but yes, that's one, but I mean, that's the kind of thing you're looking for, because sometimes when you're looking at...
Tree ordinance wasn't one of my things, but to your point, it isn't absolutely a good one. Is there something, we have a pretty robust tree ordinance, I would argue, certainly some wish it was more robust, but is there something that ought to be included to extend beyond what we're doing now in light of, we had 18 months of comprehensive plan plus stormwater utility. That's a pretty narrow window in a 35-year-old document, and I'd like to know just, is there more that could be done to support those 2 documents? We've got an enormous amount of resources invested in those 2 efforts.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to miss an opportunity to leverage them, if you will.
If I can just interrupt for a second. I didn't First of all, I appreciate the pace at which this process goes. I appreciate that, and am supportive of, as I said earlier, facilitating its conclusion in a, what's that phrase, all deliberate speed? Because we do need to reach a conclusion. I am also mindful of, we've been through, when I've been around the block, a lot of these different projects where it takes some time, and ultimately, at the end of the day, even though it may have been a little frustrating, the additional time is well worth the investment. I'm not concerned about that. On the other hand, I also didn't, at least I didn't understand Commissioner Barnett to be saying, let's hit the reset button, but more of a sanity check, such as, well, let me just see what somebody else is doing before I not declare mission accomplished, because this is something we'll continue to work on, obviously, but let me just see what somebody else has done, just sort of a sanity check. And third, though, now that you mentioned it, that pile of paper that the Commissioner Barnett's going to get, I would add the tree preservation ordinance to it, because that actually did have some really good stuff in it, and it's already in a little spiral-bound document, and it actually does speak to something we don't do that we could do.
Sure.
It's actually a good suggestion.
Well, there's a lot to add to it, too.
And I'm not, you know, this has been a long time coming, and it's definitely worth it, but my thought is that by the time this got to first reading, I'm surprised that these questions hadn't been asked already. And I guess that was more to the point. I'm not trying to necessarily rush you, but I just am kind of...
Didn't take it that way.
Just kind of surprised that it would come up at this point if it hadn't come up already. So...
this is the real workshop we've had on this. Everything else was informative. So...
But I said, well, I'm not saying it's a bad question, Sean, but my point is that I'm...
challenging the timing, right?
I'm just thinking, I'm just saying it's workshop, it's called first reading, you would have, expected it to be next week on the agenda for voting, and it doesn't seem that it's anywhere near ready for that by what Commissioner Barnett said, though by everything else the rest of you said, you seem to be satisfied with it. Not that I'm not saying that Commissioner Barnett doesn't have a good point, I'm just kind of surprised at the timing of it. That is all I was saying.
And again, I understand your points completely, and just two last things. One, on other ordinances of this scope and magnitude, I've seen us go through a similar situation, similar process with completely different councils and different issues. Go back to the sign ordinance back in 2005. It was people, why did it take so long? Well, but eventually we got it done, and it wasn't all half that bad. The other thing is that I've also come to learn that different people function in this role differently, and some people have all their stuff ready to go right off the bat. Other people like to sort of listen and hear the discussion before they weigh in. Everybody just operates a little bit differently, so sometimes that means we don't all necessarily, we're not all in the same part and point in the conga line.
Oh, I got that. Thank you.
Hey, Marge, before you leave, let me say one more thing. You highlight a really good question, kind of irrespective of the stormwater ordinance, for the process itself. And, the mayor pointed out that people see and react to things and treat things a little differently. And Sean mentioned, the idea of informative versus debate, if you will, or discussion. What we have had to this point has been, as you highlighted, either informative from other groups or largely isolated kinds of conversations. And so this is one of the first times that we're really, truly hearing each other talk about it. And that changes things. It's a part of the process. It's valuable, I think. I think it's invaluable, and I wish we'd do more of it. But it is a unique step in the process to this point. Whether it's Plan Commission, most of us are getting notes from them. So it's a single directional, isolated review of somebody else's comments. If they're one-on-one meetings with the manager as we go along, again, they're pretty isolated. I don't get to hear Greg react to something or David say something in that context. And that's the stage we're at now collectively with this, is now we're talking to and with each other about it. And that generates a whole series of comments. We'll go home tonight and David will go looking up Tom's driveway width thing, and the first thing you know, there'll be 9 new questions on it, and it's just a different part of the process.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Other questions or comments? And that was part of the process right there, actually. Any other questions from the audience, comments? Last comments tonight on this topic from any members of the village? All right, so for the second time, we've now wrapped up the first reading agenda. All right, then, since I concluded the mayor's report, we're actually on item 11, the manager's report. Mr. Fieldman?
No report tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to item 12, village attorney's report. Ms. Petrarca?
Thank you, Mayor. Only one item to present tonight, and that is an ordinance authorizing a special use to permit an automobile dealership at 2100 Ogden Avenue. That is all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Brings us to item 13, council member new business. May members of the village council have any items of new business they would like to bring up at this time? If so, please signify by raising your hand. Seeing none, that brings us to item 14. We cannot adjourn tonight. We need to adjourn into executive session. Do I have a motion to adjourn into executive session?
Mayor Tully, I move to convene into closed session pursuant to Section 2C2 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act to consider collective negotiating matters between the village and its employees or their representatives.
So moved.
Second, you mean?
Second.
Any questions or comments? No. Seeing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Commissioner Newstat?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Thank you. We are adjourned. Good night.